Chapter 5. L'Evêque de Luçon. There is a need to avoid debauchery, such as celebrating engagements after sunset. Darkness and wine obliterate all respect. L'instruction douche de chrétien Armand Jean Du Plessis, Evêque de Luçon, 1607 AD. A quill poised in the right hand, Armand Jean Du Plessis was making annotation on the copies he had received from the Vatican regarding the speech the Archbishop Gaspare Ricciulli de Fasso, Reggio de Calabria, had made in front of the Council of Trent some 45 years earlier. The Evêque of Luçon was only a young man of 22 then, but one full of ambition. He wanted power most of all. In the Middle Ages, power resided with the clergy, more specifically with those who were close to the dynasties of Europe. He silently wished he had met Gaspare Ricciulli. The man had attained recognition and power at a time there were practically no mercy for those who dared speak against the tenets of the Church. Changing the day of worship from Saturday to Sunday was indeed a feat worthy of recognition on the part of the young Du Plessis. Armand was full of vigor and full of unrequited love. He would invoke chastity from the pulpit, but would succumb to manly desires when no one was looking. He was plagued with venereal diseases and suffered from the sequels of illicit intercourses for all the years he remained in the chair of cardinal, and that until his death in December 1642 at the age of 57. However, for his sins he never had the pleasure to sit amongst the prelates, such as Ricciulli had done a half a century previously. In order to get closer to the papal court while sojourning and studying in Rome, he succeeded to impress the Pope by repeating an entire sermon verbatim a day after it was pronounced. Thus ingratiating himself in the Pope's favour, Armand Jean Du Plessis was ordained Bishop of Luçon in April of 1607 in Rome. Since he was younger than any other bishop ever ordained into this rank, the Pope justified the ordination by saying, "It is just that the man who displays sagacity for far above his age be ordained before his requisite age." Yet the young bishop had another agenda in mind when spending time in Italy after his ordination. He wanted to meet the Ricciulli family. He wanted to acquaint himself with men of the cloth that had been blessed with the power of swaying even the papal courts of the era. However, the Ricciullis were not Romans. They lived in the south of Italy, and Armand had even heard of a branch of the family residing in Salerno, St. Matthew's resting place. A family of devout men and women, he was firm in his decision to make the journey to the Ricciulli's place of residence in secret. He could not be seen to have any contact with anyone who could repeat his intentions later in his clerical and diplomatic career. The man he wanted to meet was only 3 years his senior and resided at the time in Belcastro, Italy. Historically, certain information sees Belcastro as an episcopal seat in the 9th century during the Byzantine age. Walls were erected to defend against Saracen attacks, as they were already established in Sicily since 830. However, the Saracen finally stormed the village in 896 and occupied it for 40 years. The Byzantines redeemed Belcastro during 936, but had to cede it again with the arrival of the Normans in 1065, who assigned the century to the Falloc family and made Belcastro a county of the reign. In 1500, Countess Constanzo de Avalos de Aquino acquired Belcastro. It remained in the d'Aquino family until Giovan Battista paid 80,000 ducats to purchase the city. The Battista family was well acquainted with the Ricciullis, and after the death of Gaspare di Fasso, the Italian monarchy was expecting great things from the newborn heir Antonio Ricciulli. On his way down to the tip of the Italian peninsula, Armand Jean Du Plessis, now Bishop de Luçon, stopped for the night in Salerno. He had to visit the tomb of the 12th apostle of Christ, Matthew. To say he was surprised when he stepped off the carriage and gazed at the tower of Byzantine cathedral housing the tomb would have been understating his annoyance. Born a Roman Catholic and filled with disdain for anything remotely related to the Arabic state or Islam, he was clearly astonished to see that the apostle of Christ was buried in a house that reminded the young man of the Middle East. Dressed in the vestments of a monk, the bishop entered the cathedral with mixed feelings. He could not reconcile the sepulchre's outside appearance with the inside of the cathedral. The apse alone caught the bishop's breath. It was definitely a place of atonement. When he genuflected in front of the altar and turned to leave, 3 men in clerical robes came to his encounter. Armand Jean Du Plessis, I presume, the younger of the 3 priests said. His smile was gentle and welcoming. I am Antonio Ricciulli, your eminence. Obviously taken aback, Armand stared into the eyes of the young Antonio. He could not consider the man in front of him as his equal, yet his superiority was visible and audible. How extraordinary, Armand finally declared. I was journeying to your residence, which I believe is Belcastro, is it not? Yes, it is, Bishop. However, I am here with my brother and my friend for a week of contemplation before I joined the seminary. Armand threw a glance in the direction of the older man standing beside Antonio. If I may be so rude, Father, but you look awfully familiar. Have we been introduced? Damianos is the name, Bishop, and I believe our path has crossed on a couple of occasions when Her Majesty Marie de Medici required assistance. Have you been to Florence, then? Armand inquired. Yes, but not with my companions yet, Damianos replied, and then turned to Constanzo. Bishop, may I introduce you to Constanzo, brother of Antonio, and both cousins of Gaspare Ricciulli, the Bishop de Reggio de Calabria? It is an honour to make your acquaintances. Your family's names will be written in the annals of our church. The men bowed to each other before Armand asked, Would you be so kind to accompany me in my journey to your residence? I have a carriage at my disposal that will be large enough to seat the 4 of us comfortably, I am quite sure. Constanzo and Antonio exchanged a glance. Damianos nodded. By all means, Bishop, dear Luçon. We will be delighted to escort you to our family home. However, prior to journeying down to southern Italy with Armand Du Plessis, Damianos, Antonio, and Constanzo went to pack their luggage from the priest's house, or maison, near the cathedral. Please, Damianos, Antonio said, please tell me. Tell us. This is not a dream. I feel as if I am living someone else's life. He looked up at Constanzo. Maybe you should pinch me, so I'm sure that I'm not some sort of ghost, please. Don't be so fearful, Antonio, Constanzo replied. You know we are here in the flesh, and that until our family bears the descendants that will ultimately bring you to the steps of redemption. Antonio nodded and lifted his gaze to his brother. Why are you doing this? He asked, perhaps for the umpteenth time. What redemption could you possibly need? You have been an immaculate example of sobriety since you've joined the priesthood. Why would the Lord want you to bear the burden of my cross, and for you to follow in my travels? You know very well of my antecedents, Antonio. The wars I have fought, the conflicts I have seen, the disputes I have fought have all left marks on my soul. Such as you are scarred for your misdeeds, so am I for my carelessness and egotism. He paused. I have done too much of the wrong things to be forgiven at the end of a prayer, so you will be burdened by my company for as long as the Lord wants me to remain at your side. Damianos, who had been listening to the exchange quietly, decided to speak. Well said, young man, both of you understand now why I have brought you down to this century. You, Dan, in the person of Antonio, and you, Gustavo, in the person of Constanzo, are about to relive one of the most extraordinary times in the history of Europe. Armand Jean Du Plessis, the Red Cardinal, as he will be called in years to come, will be the fiend, an ally one may need, but one may not want. He seems harmless to me, Antonio remarked as he closed his leather sack. And to be ordained bishop at the age of 22, he certainly must have done something right, didn't he? It is right to report the misdeeds of a king in order to gain the favours of the Pope. You tell me. Damianos sounded deprecatory and even hateful. And why beholdest thou the mote that is in thy brother's eye? Considerest not the beam that is in thy own eye? Antonio cited the words of Matthew to Damianos before he went any further in his comments. This is the city of Matthew, the apostle, who urged the disciples not to judge Damianos. Let's escort the bishop to our home, and perhaps we will see the soul that resides inside the body of this man. While the 3 men were discussing their upcoming journey in the morning and prior to their departure, Armand Du Plessis made a point of visiting the famous house of medicine in Salerno. Suffering from violent and debilitating headaches, the young Armand's mother had pleaded with Mary de Medici to give him a recommendation for treatment in this particular hospital. As he climbed the steps toward the medical facility's entrance, Armand was full of hope for a more peaceful existence, free of aching muscles and painful sores appearing on his legs from time to time. A half an hour later, in the chamber of the medical practitioner of the hospital, only terrorized screams could be heard emanating from the mouth of the young bishop. Bleeding disease out of your body, Bishop, is the only infallible method to relieve you from these painful headaches. The pressure upon your brain from the overabundance of blood proves too much for you to bear. Therefore, the pain is the only way your body can alert you of your ailments. How long do I have to stand this torture? Armand asked, sweat purling on his forehead. It will not be long now, Bishop. We have collected almost 2 bottlefuls, so it will not be long at all until I can release you. Once a dressing was applied to the wound on Armand's arm, and he felt significantly strong to walk out of the hospital, he did so with a sigh of relief. As he was climbing back into his carriage, he swore under his breath and promised himself he would never submit to such treatment again. He would have to speak to the Queen about this as soon as he returned to France. How could they possibly hope to cure anyone of anything if they take all the blood away from your loins? He asked himself quietly.